Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight's video topic was selected by patron Misunderstood. So, I hope you enjoy demonic stories. If you would like the power to select a video topic, all that you need to do is sign up to Patreon. You can find all the information in the description via the link. Also, before we start, my animator and I are working towards obtaining the software we need to carry on creating the animations that you may have previously seen. However, as you can expect, animation software is quite expensive. A GoFundMe page has been set up to try and help cover the costs of the software, and if you have $1 or $2 spare that you want to chip in, that'd be amazing. Of course, no obligation, no pressure, but it's there and would of course be tremendously appreciated. I of course will be donating as well. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I was 17 at the time. Me and my stepbro were outside sneaking a smoke and just talking. It was wet out, and we were standing by a window with a mesh screen. I was telling him about conspiracies in Hollywood, mostly having to do with Satanism in the music industry, and the symbolism behind it. I told him about the pentagram, and he didn't know what it was. Instead of describing it to him, I began to draw one on the wet screen. As soon as I connected the circle, we both heard a deep, guttural growl directly behind us. We both looked back and saw nothing but an open field. We then competed to be the first one through the back door, shoving match style. And to this day, I don't mess with pentagrams, as I don't want to accidentally summon another demon. A few years ago, my mum was sleeping downstairs, and she had an encounter with something inhuman. I always used to get scared at night and knock on their door to sleep with them. And one night my mum heard a knock on her door, and she assumed it was me. So she said, "Come in," while still half asleep. She heard the door open and heard something quickly patter across the ground and jump on the bed, and it began whispering in her ear, mimicking her voice. She freaked out, opened her eyes to see a very skinny, small, webbed-looking creature running out the room. Me and my dad awoke to her screaming. We believed the house was haunted, because we all had paranormal experiences in the house. The previous owners were drug addicts who performed satanic rituals and the like. When I showed her a picture of a skinwalker, she said that it looked similar, but we don't know if this was a skinwalker, demon, or malevolent spirit. For context, I am a Christian. I was at the grocery store doing the usual shopping, and in comes this woman. She was wearing a giant backpack and jogging attire. From the get-go, you could hear her mumbling and talking to herself. I reckoned she was probably schizophrenic. It got worse though. She was more aggressive and started shouting, telling the voices to stop and leave her alone, and that they've been dead for 15 years. People were noticing, so they moved away. The staff avoided her uncomfortably. So I get the idea. Maybe if I pray for her, I thought I'd ask God to free her from this thing. Something like, "Let her in Jesus' name get out of there." I was standing way off behind her as I whispered, so she couldn't possibly have heard me. But just as I said amen, the woman abruptly said out loud to herself, "She belongs to us. You won't get us out of here. She's ours. Go away. You don't have the right." This was really loud. I've prayed for people before, but I did not expect that and honestly was very shocked. I was so surprised, I paid and left. I wasn't ready for a fight. I might try again if I get the opportunity, but that is certainly one of the more interesting paranormal experiences I've ever happened. So, to the woman who may or may not have a demon in her head, I'm going to pray for you and hope you're okay. My earliest memory as a kid is standing up in my crib and screaming my head off, while an entity growled aggressively and shook my crib from underneath. I can still vividly remember this, even though it's been decades. Over the course of my life, I've had countless experiences and encounters, each very different than the other. By my mid-20s, I believed I simply suffered from some sort of variation of sleep paralysis and shoved it to the back of my mind, choosing to ignore it. However, back in 2014, I had a series of belief-changing revelations about the nature of my problems, shifting it from sleep paralysis to demonic oppression. I dream in twilight, precisely right before sunsets. It's that dark, murky light that allows you to move around the house but makes everything grey and eerie. I've also never had a happy dream in my entire life, one where I felt excited, joy or positive in any way. I've never felt self-pity or sorry for myself. I just thought that was the way it was when you dream, having never questioned this before. I only recently discovered how weird that is through a discussion with a close friend. Greater than 90% of all my dreams/incidents involve me laying exactly in the same position I'm sleeping in. During the incident, with twilight gleaming over everything, I can't tell that I'm actually not awake. The mood or atmosphere in the room is the blackest, loneliest, most isolating feeling with the most intense presence of evil that I honestly can't use words to convey accurately. You can only experience this sort of evil. The most vivid, detailed entities, creatures, twisted humans that have visited me. I've never seen anything like this in Hollywood movies, but I can tell that someone in Hollywood writing the scripts have been inspired, most likely because they've seen them too. What do they do to me, you wonder? They're attempting to get me to engage them in a conversation, and I sense they're trying to offer me something. However, I've never engaged them. Once I realized I was being visited, my fear spiraled up to the most insanely intense levels that I could begin to hear my physical screams bleed into this dream. Right when they make a move to escalate the engagement, I exit this dark realm with a physical scream, and everything that was there just blacks out of existence. Does that sound like a classic case of sleep paralysis? That's what I told myself, and subsequently suffered for decades. I've kept a log of dozens of individual incidents over the years, but the purpose of this is to tell you my overall story. I'm excellent at my work because I can take care of explosive situations, calm enraged customers, and turn it around into a successful business relationship. I could walk into a room and sense people's moods, if they hated me, if they liked me, or if they thought me untrustworthy, if they were assholes as well. This may sound like total BS, but I can't explain it, because there's no logical way to convey this to people who haven't experienced it. How do you explain the color red to a blind person who's never seen anything in their entire life? Red is red, and that's where every foundation description begins when describing that color, right? Explaining my gut sense was very much like that. Regarding animals, particularly dogs, I had an affinity that was bizarre. I like them. I'm practically the opposite of a huggy, cuddly, sensitive dude. I don't seek them out. I don't watch dog YouTube videos. I'm just cool with them, generally speaking. Anyway, I've been around hundreds of strange dogs over the past 10 years, having close and extended proximity to them, and within minutes, they'll be in my lap, rolled over, wagging their tail and allowing me to pet them. The people who own the dogs will usually choir off one of these things. That's weird. I've never seen Fluffy do that before. Or, wow, usually Mabel wants to kill anyone. I knew something was weird when I walked up to two drug house dogs. Think junkyard dogs. These aren't pets, they're not coddled and are only kept outdoors and never shown affection by the owner because they have a single job to do: clear out dangerous criminal elements in drug flophouse. These dogs are the shock troops that they send in after the initial verbal warning to clear out. These dogs are vicious, nasty, and basically hate all humans other than the handler that feeds them, and they always clear the house. They were in a fenced-in kennel and going nuts with other people in the room. They were growling nastily through the chain links, pacing, barking threateningly, and I looked at them and felt a tug in my gut. I was completely calm and unafraid, and started to walk up to the fence. The owner yelled that I better keep my distance. The dog's eyes locked with mine, and I stood inches away from the dogs through the chain links. They all sat down easily and patiently watched me from a calm, at ease position, completely silent and non-agitated. They seemed either comfortable or intrigued for whatever reason. The dog's owner just said, "I've never seen that happen before." He was dumbfounded. These dogs would still shred me to pieces, no doubt, but I felt that they knew I would never be arrogant enough to think that I could pet them. They could have opened the kennel, and I know they would have been fine to me. To bring this back to the discussion though, over time I started to piece together that there's something weird going on with me. I slowly started to go from a complete skeptic on the supernatural my entire life, towards believing that for every New Age belief, there is probably some truth of it. 2014, the year of my demonic oppression crescendo. A combination of a very stressful job and a significant upticks in incidents led to a low point in my life. I'm 6 foot tall and dropped to 140 pounds. For reference, I'm finally approaching 170. I'm still questioned by friends and acquaintances if I'm ill. And at the time, I looked like an extra for The Walking Dead, all without needing any makeup. I couldn't eat meat because it didn't sit well in my gut for days and would cause me immense agony. I would sleep an hour at a time, awaken, be up for an hour, and doze off repeatedly throughout the night. I've had nerve issues where my body would jerk involuntarily, and I would lose feeling in my thigh if I stood up too long. After work, or whenever I would travel out of town, often I would fall asleep right as I came home from pure exhaustion, sometimes not eating and sleep until the next morning when I'd get back to work. Through all of this, I would have frequent and multiple nightly incidences that would disturb me and my wife. I was slowly dying physically, though I stubbornly chose to ignore it. My wife would constantly get comments like, "Is he alright? What's going on?" Or more to the point, "He looks like he's gonna die." My wife would post pictures of me on Facebook occasionally, events or birthdays, and would immediately get responses that are horrified, asking if I had cancer. Oddly, my wife had several New Age friends that would comment, "He's surrounded by dark spirits," and "There's a dark cloud surrounding his life aura." How can you deduce that from a photo? I have no idea, but I eventually grew to believe them in time. Emotionally, I was completely blank. I felt nothing. No sadness, no anger, no joy. The dam finally broke when I had an incident where I woke up screaming. That part is normal, but my wife looked truly frightened this time. I asked, "What's different this time?" She said, "You were screaming, 'Stay away from my wife.'" She decided to take a non-traditional problem-solving route at this point. This is when things got really weird. My wife and I went on vacation to the East Coast. On the last night, we had a bad argument and she left upset, driving to a small southern city to take her mind off things. I stayed in the hotel and she was walking along the boardwalk when a man popped out to give her a free reading to a fortune teller. She went to see the fortune teller. Keep in mind, this fortune teller knew nothing about the situation. I'll reference to the fortune teller as Gypsy, and here's a breakdown of the conversation they had. The Gypsy goes, "Who's emotional?" And my wife bursts into tears. "Me." "Why are you so emotional?" "I fight with my husband." "Why?" "My husband isn't sleeping. It's affecting his mood drastically. It's worse than ever." "He has anxiety, and he isn't sleeping. He sees something, but it isn't a dream." "What do you mean it isn't a dream?" "It wakes him up, this thing. He isn't really an insomniac. It's something he sees every night. His eyes are open, but they aren't at the same time. Do you know what it is?" "Yes. It's a very bad entity. Your husband is so incredibly alone and isolated. The fear he has to deal with nightly is unimaginable. He has no one he can explain these things to." "Does the entity have a name?" "Yes, but this is something we do not talk about. He made a contract with him in a previous life, and it wants to collect. Your husband knows him." "How do we get rid of it?" "I could help, but he has to be ready for it." "He blames me, and it's all my fault." "No. Your husband was like this before. It wants him to think it's you." "The moment I moved in with my husband, he turned into this." "No, it's not your husband. This thing is trying to drive a wedge in your relationship and try to manipulate. It wants him to go off into solitude, wants to isolate him for whatever it plans. The moment you're married, your husband, it got furious." "What does it want?" "It wants to collect." "It tries to speak with him. Jabberjaw, fast flapping mouth, not really like a human movement." "Your husband does exactly what he should to break out of it. Its lips are moving in the dream. Your husband does not engage." "What is it saying?" "You do not want to know. The movement you speak to it, it gets power. It's not just vacation, it's everywhere. It's not you. It wants you to think it's you. Just ignore it." "What do I do?" "Go back. Your husband is worried about you being alone at night. This comes from his mother's side. His mother was always very odd, wasn't she? You're nothing like your mother-in-law. He has another sibling who has this." "His brother?" "No, it's a sister. She's really into one thing that makes other people uncomfortable. She does things that makes others think she's weird." "Should my husband call her and try to help?" "No. She tells no one about it. She suffers and deals with it on her own. She will not engage your husband in this conversation. Your husband has got to have the answer before he can figure this out." "How many people have you known to have this sort of problem?" "Maybe 3. 2 have beaten it. Doesn't help that his job is wearing him out. Your husband has never had joy. He's done normal things but never felt it. The one thing your husband has is absolute total disappointment. He's done everything right, played by the rules, and done everything that's expected, and he still has not obtained happiness. That was the conversation. Jump to a few months later. My wife had a psychic stop by one day to read a dog. It's just the kind of novelty thing she thought would be funny. We didn't know this person. It was a paid professional visit. When the psychic arrived, I decided to walk upstairs to be friendly, and she was staring at me with a very concerned look. "Hi," I said. "What the heck is going on in this house?" said the psychic. "What do you mean?" "As soon as I stepped through your door, a seriously bad entity said to me, 'I'm not interested in you.'" We discussed a little longer, and my wife asked, "What should we do?" She said, "This isn't anything I can help you with. I'll have to talk to a shaman. I know one who's dealt with this before." At the time, I thought this might be a racket. The psychic is just setting us up for another New Age service from one of her colleagues. However, this entire scenario was eventually corroborated independently from the gypsy fortune teller, who did not know this psychic or the shaman. I've never told the fortune teller their names. Yet, this is like a bad movie, only I was living it. Fast forward to the shaman. We talked several times and I initially turned down his offer of services. He was going to visit our house and was insistent that the psychic attend. The shaman said that he couldn't do it alone, and that he needed the psychic there to help him. The psychic was surprised when I told her that the shaman was adamant in visiting my house. She said that he never visits people at their house. This bit of information is relevant later, when I meet the East Coast fortune teller later on. I schedule a time for the shaman to visit, ultimately giving up on any resistance and deciding to roll the dice. I had nothing to lose at this point. The shaman shows up in the morning, and I took the day off. He walked in, walked up to me, frowned and shook his head violently and said, "I can hardly stand being near you. It's almost insufferable. Let me sage you first." He then smoked me with sage, said some sort of Indian chant, and then looked a little more at ease. He stared at me in the eyes for an uncomfortably long time and simply uttered, "You're beyond exhausted, aren't you?" He nailed it in that simple sentence. They then cleared the entire house. The sage would flare up like a forest fire around certain parts of the house, denoting a portal. Where I sat in my office, the sage smoked up instantly, and more intensely than anywhere else. The shaman stated this was an extremely powerful and extremely evil entity that had been attached to me my entire life. I asked him what it was, or if he knew its name. The shaman said he did know its name, but refused to say it out loud. He did state that he only knew of one other person that this particular entity had haunted. He cut off this line of questioning and proceeded to clear the house. As they were wrapping up, the shaman again stood in front of me, staring uncomfortably long, then asked a very odd and simple question. "Do you love yourself?" That struck me as oddly, as I'd never really been asked that. I smiled, pondered, and then a revelation happened several hours after he left. I internally forgave myself for being a failure. Simply put, I felt a knot in my guts loosen that had been there my entire life but I had just ignored. An exhausted calmness rolled over me. This was the pivot point I'd been waiting for my entire life. Fast forward to June 2015. I had far fewer incidents at this time, and started to feel better between the shaman visit and this vacation. My wife wanted me to go see the fortune teller since I had never met them. I didn't have any agenda, so I agreed, thinking it could be intriguing academically. While driving there, I told my wife, oddly, suddenly out of the blue, she knows I'm coming. I can't say why I said this, I just knew it to be the truth. I arrive in the fortune teller's parlor. After a minute or so of typical stranger small talk, the fortune teller abruptly stated, "I know who you are, and I knew you were coming." No kidding, exactly what I'd said days earlier while driving there. The fortune teller actually recalled the details of my wife's visit back in late September 2014. It was creepy and amazing at the same time. The context of all her comments and observations were all in line with my wife's visit last year. Another eerie thing was that the fortune teller looked like she could be related to my mother, almost as if they were sisters. I did have some small area of doubt at first, but my gut sense was telling me this fortune teller was the real deal. The shaman was afraid of you and what was targeting you. When he first walked into your house, he wanted to turn around and run away. He didn't bring his helper, the psychic, to protect him. He brought his helper in order for the entity to attach to his helper, thinking she would be weaker and it would go for her rather than him. He thinks she is weaker than himself. He did it to protect himself. When I spoke to the shaman several times while brokering a visit, he always insisted that he needed to bring a second person. I thought he was trying to dupe me for more service fees. Maybe that's how this group of psychics feed into each other's business. In hindsight, the fee was ridiculously low. $100 for the shaman to come on site and $50 for his helper for 3 hours. It wasn't about the money, but they did need compensation for their time and travel. This wasn't a moneymaker for them. In hindsight, I think they genuinely did want to help me. I have no gut feeling regarding the fortune teller's reading on the shaman's motivation to bring the other psychic along for the home visit. It's possible, maybe even probable given his avoidance behavior later on in the story. The shaman is afraid of you. Also, about a week before we went on vacation and visited the fortune teller, I saw the shaman at a public event. He noticed me and looked away, and looked visibly uncomfortable. I got a really weird feeling in my gut, like he wanted to avoid me altogether. I said, "Thank you, things are better than they were," and he rapidly waved, nodded his head, turned away abruptly, and began talking to someone else. He did not want to engage me in any manner. The gypsy said that people used to be afraid of me, not in a physical sense or that I could harm them, but they would avoid me. And this is possible. It's hard to self-evaluate this. I've had random panhandlers tell me, "I don't want anything from you. You look mean." Not great for the self-confidence, but I've always brushed it off. Another thing the gypsy said is that I've sought help several times in the past, but none have helped me. That they were afraid of me, but not of me, rather what surrounds me. And although that's true, I did visit a shaman before, no one clued into my self-loathing. The gypsy went on to say that my mother experienced this entity haunting her the entire time she was pregnant, that she was extremely scared and worried, and she thought that she was going to lose me or miscarry, and that I was a high-risk pregnancy in multiple ways. It's important to note that this is true. Both my mum and dad had told me they were afraid they were going to lose me over the course of years. I've never thought once to ask what they actually meant by that. The gypsy said that my mum would sometimes not go to sleep for nights on end while she was pregnant, in order to avoid the entity visiting her at night. She had constant nightmares during her entire pregnancy, and that there was also a large sum of money for that time period. She, of course, was speaking of my mother's youth that was stolen. Someone either directly or indirectly lost their life as a result of this, and that my mum's side of the family has had money come and go, but none of them have found happiness and all still struggle to this day. This is true. My grandfather and uncle stole land rights from my mum and her sisters that were deeded to them. They forged documents, sold the rights and took the money. The lawsuit went on for decades and wrapped up shortly after my mum's death over 10 years ago. It was a big deal on her side of the family and created a schism they never recovered from. I said that my wife thinks that we should reconnect with my mum's family to figure out what might have happened. But the gypsies said no, and to stay away from them, and that my mother kept me from them for good reason, that nothing good could come out of reconnecting. She went on to say that my mum expected to lose me early in life. Her biggest fear was the entity getting to me, and that several weeks before her death, she called me to plead that I turn towards the light in her own way. She knew that something was going to happen to her very soon, and she was driven to make sure that I was safe even after she was gone. Everything she said, she nailed it. The last time I spoke with my mum was when I was living in a different state. I recall it being just a few weeks before she was killed. Mum called one night after work and went on for hours about getting back to church, praying and making sure I take care of my spiritual side, getting right with God. I spoke very little and sadly blocked out much of what she was saying. I said all the right things to my mum, but I was just on autopilot, just trying to appease her and get her off the phone. I was exhausted from work, and I blew mum off mentally while on the phone. This was the only time I can recall my mother being preachy. That was the only thing I recall her talking about. I still have some lingering guilt about my mindset on that phone call with my mum. The gypsy went on to say that while I sleep, the entity tries to show me something, and I sense that the entity puts a hand over my wife's mouth in order to stop her from waking me. The gypsy went on to say that since the shaman visited, and I've forgiven myself, or at least started to love myself, the entity is no longer in the room while I sleep at night. Then she said, "Why do I have visions of 2 floors of a house with people sleeping on both?" And I reply, my screaming in the night was becoming so bad that it was having an effect on my wife's health. I'm sleeping downstairs at night in order to get control of it. I don't feel the same entity plaguing me, but I still get frequent visitations by other beings that cause me to yell out. It's different, but I'm still yelling out into the night too frequently for my wife to rest easy. I see a tiny room, which opens up to a bigger and then larger room that you can look out of, over and through it. This tiny room with a tiny door is where the shaman trapped the entity. It's still in the house. She described the sump pump room exactly. The shaman was extremely bothered by this room. The sage he was burning bloomed like a forest fire around that room. The shaman didn't finish his job and didn't tell you the truth. All the crystals he gave you need to be buried down a road you can never drive past regularly, or thrown into a river somewhere. The crystals have absorbed the negative power and are keeping it there. Somehow, she knew there were power crystals placed throughout our house. Once again, uncanny and creepy. I see a teenager who is very angry. Yes, that's our neighbor's grandson. Is he dangerous? No, he's not dangerous. He's very angry because of his grandparents' anger. Your presence is causing every neighbor around you to be affected. They're afraid of you, and you're stirring it up for them, making it worse. You will do a lot of good for people in the future, just not right now. You're still working through a lot of things. People will seek you out for your help. You know we're both Christian. The Bible doesn't cover what you do in cases like this. That's why I'm not conflicted by coming to you. These two work in parallel and don't necessarily cancel out or contradict each other. No one in church or no pastor would deal with things of this manner. They would view me as possessed and just pray over me. It would help, but it's not enough, the gypsy said. For a period of time, the entity had you believing that you were seeing things that couldn't possibly exist. Footnote, she nailed it. How can she know this? I've always believed that I've had two types of events. One is simple dreams, the other is when I would lose the ability to tell if I was awake or asleep. These are extremely vivid, and the entities that visit me have details that I could draw and paint, as if I were using a magnifying glass on the dream. I'm able to zoom in on these things in the encounter, rather than the details unraveling. They just get more vivid. I've always believed I was seeing something with my waking eye and not dreaming. Since the fortune teller made this comment, I've shifted my belief that these aren't physical manifestations anymore. At least, not physical in our dimension. I have no doubt they're real in a different manner. However, the gypsy went on. Others in your family have this going on. For one, it has gotten worse recently. Everyone in your family isolates themselves. They call each other, but that's just going through the motions. This has affected your entire family, but no one talks about it between them. This is why no one calls each other. She wants to isolate and keep each person to their self. She also nailed the family dynamic. We never talk about our feelings with each other. I believe one sister has it the worst. She has been out there, mega religious, for decades now. She is also the sister that I am the most distant with. Ironic? I'll help you with this. You can do this over the phone, and I tell you what you need to complete in your house. I don't want money from you. She gave me 45 minutes of her time and refused to accept money from me. I don't know what this means or why she would be motivated to refuse money or why she would help me for free. But she went on to say, the whole time the shaman was there and had you go through his rituals, you didn't feel it. You felt like it was doing nothing. Yeah, I know it wasn't doing anything. The only thing that resonated was his question, do you love yourself? I answered yes, but realized I didn't really mean it at the time. I started to think about it, and over the course of a few days, I felt in my gut that I forgave myself. This was when things started to improve. The entity hasn't visited me since November in my dreams. The shaman played his role, but didn't finish the work. Don't have him come back even though he suggested another cleansing of the house. The crystals you have scattered around, you need to rid yourself of them. Bury them along a roadside you never travel down, or throw them into a creek or river you never cross in your travels. She also somehow knew about these crystals the friends had given us. They're under the bed and in front of the mirror and scattered throughout the house. You have a very strong power in you that can be used for good. You have an ability. I can help you develop it, but you will have to deal with this situation. Once you figure it out, people will seek help from you. I also have no idea what she means by this, but I didn't ask any questions. Other psychics I've seen have said that I'm really powerful, and if I've ever thought about developing my abilities. This is the allure I think a lot of people would find cool, but I find it completely horrifying. I'll never pursue this, I just want to be normal. I just want to sleep. Towards the end of the reading, she said, "That's your wife out there. Did she want a viewing?" Just to note, my wife had shown up in the waiting room, yet somehow knew this even though the doors were closed. Yes, she wanted to talk with you. No, not tonight. Not after talking to you. Maybe on Tuesday. I've got to go do some meditation in preparation for Tuesday. The fortune teller did not meet with me or my wife after this reading. Her shop wasn't open for business for the rest of the week, and she would not return any of my phone calls until later that week while we were there. I called her and left voice messages with no return calls from her. I can't fathom the reason why she would do everything she has done for us thus far, take no money and then simply not communicate with me. She effectively cut me off. This worried me for a time, but I eventually stopped sweating on this. I didn't need her help as time progressed. I was a skeptic my entire life on the paranormal, even when I was at ground zero with my own incidents. I dismissed them as sleep disorders, having a medical basis at worst. Having 3 independent New Agers engage me at length and nail stuff they couldn't possibly have known about has turned me into a believer in the supernatural. While I believe in the supernatural and that New Age people have actual power, I personally and strongly advise against pursuing this. Out of desperation, I gave up and got involved. While they did convince me it's real and led me to ending my self-loathing and getting lasting peace, their superpowers didn't prove any magical cure. Maybe they were put in my path to learn the simple lesson of love thyself. That is what makes most sense to me. My belief is that these demonic entities latch onto your own initial damage that's deep inside of you, and unfortunately, only you can remove this hook they have onto you. I don't believe I did this alone. However, my entire life I've been a Christian, though admittedly I'm probably not a paragon of how you live your life. I've always felt safe while I'm awake and doing normal everyday things. My gut tells me this is God's presence. In my twilight dreams, however, I don't feel this same level of protection, and have a theory. Hell's worst punishment, biblically speaking, is the lack of God's presence. My theory for these twilight dreams is that I'm glimpsing into some version of hell. I'm on their territory, and there is a lessening of God's presence. I think I have a kernel of His presence still in me, but I have an indescribable fear that it's completely off the charts. I have just enough help and strength to scream my way out of there, thankfully. My advice is to not pursue supernatural things, because it won't end well. Engagement is almost certain to ensure something hooks onto you. Regarding my affinity for dogs, I now believe this to be instinctive in them. I think dogs can see things people can't. I think dogs sense the oppression around me and instinctively engage me protectively. I genuinely appreciate this and happily accept it. I always feel more protected with any dog around. They are pretty amazing creatures. Presently, I get tested periodically by these entities, though it's not the same one that haunted me my entire life. I can tell you how I know this, unfortunately, but they do check in to test the waters. I had one of the other nights after 3 months of peace. It was twilight. I heard rumbling electrical resonance and felt a tingle in my head. I felt the isolation, heard the shuffling outside my bedroom door, and saw the door open, heard the scrambling feet, and saw a levitating grey animal. It was like a dead thing floating up at the foot of my bed. It was trying to emulate a friendly animal, perhaps a dog, but it did a very poor physical manifestation and was reeking of evil. Closer to roadkill, just floating in the room staring at me. I stared at it and was able to utter, "Get out now," very weakly, but with conviction. I awoke instantly in my twilight dream, and in the waking world I heard "now" in both places, if that makes sense. The room was evil, dark and overbearing one moment, and then completely clear and normal and pleasant in the next instant. I didn't wake up screaming. I woke up fully aware that I had just ordered it out. There was no confusion, fuzziness, or fading memory that you usually have with your dreams after you're awoken. My only real agenda is to get these sort of life experiences out to the masses. I hope to get acknowledgement that people like us aren't crazy, and ideally, help people directly or indirectly start to deal with this by having a conversation about it. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's encounters with demons. I'm going to be honest, I did want to record way more stories, because I have plenty of demon stories that I wanted to share with you guys. The problem is I miscalculated how long the first story would take me to read. It took really long to read. So yeah, I had to cut the video short. I think probably the next demon video is going to be, XL. I'm hoping like an hour and a half. I'll have a bit more time. For those of you who don't read secret message section, which is in the bottom of the description where I sometimes share little tidbits of what's going on, I am moving tomorrow. Finally. I was moving a few months back. Didn't really work out, had to come back, but now it's all over. I am moving and I am so happy. We're so happy as a family. But yeah, moving is like super stressful. So I've had to cut the recording. I couldn't record it. I would have carried on recording basically, but I've got to prioritize the move over, double recording and editing time. Hope you guys don't mind. So anyway, I'm gonna leave it there. If you liked the video, you know what to do. Also sub if you want, if you like the stuff. And if there's a story that you wish to share, just send it to my email or my Reddit. As always, thank you to all of my amazing, incredible, fantastic patrons who really help keep the channel running. I seriously appreciate you guys. Names on screen, and if you would like your name on this list, all that you need to do is chip in a little bit of money, like $1 a month, to help keep things running. And you could also put another $1 if you want to my animator so that we can keep making the animated series we're doing. That would be super, super helpful. I am, of course, donating too. It would just really mean a lot if you could check it out. Anyway, guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. So, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.